All right, hi everyone. I'm Chris Doucet. I'm a solutions engineer at Electric Cloud. And today I'm going to speak on the subject of adopting a model-driven approach to application release. So this concept of a model-driven approach has been floating around for a little bit, but I wanted to first cover briefly the kind of evolution that is the evolution of maturity, as I call it, that has brought us here. Some of the benefits that can be realized by people who are going down this path. Some tips and best practices for maximizing success in taking this approach, and also how to get started. So the first milestone of maturity that organizations go through when it comes to releasing applications is one that has a lot of manual process, right? So this is the world of novel-sized run books with 1 to 200 sequential steps that must be performed, perfectly by imperfect people. Like, people are not designed to do this repeatedly with the same level of quality over time. And what results is you have a high frequency of failure, and what results from that is you end up having 100-person conference calls that last 4 hours long at any time of the day or night to try to fix the issue in production. So, and you could be the person either responsible for this, or you could be the person who knows how to fix it. So you have to give this priority over everything in your life while this happens. So. I think we can all agree that there are a lot of detriments to this kind of approach in terms of lack of speed, lack of consistency, visibility, and so on. So the first kind of reactionary thought that people have to this is that, okay, I need to automate. And when people think of automating, they think of scripting. So scripting has its place, right? I've written hundreds, and so have a lot of people in this room probably, for performing configuration checks, running a battery of unit tests, doing some file ops type things. But when you rely solely on scripts to do your entire end-to-end release process, then you might be stretching out their capability beyond what is practically useful. So the pain might start to outweigh their value. So, but people still tend to go down this approach anyway, right? Because scripting is free. Just pick your language and then start automating, right? And you can do it immediately. And this may be a good option initially, but then what happens over time? Like you've got a functioning script, and then you realize there's some edge cases that you're not quite supporting. So you tweak your script to support those edge cases. Then like any good organization providing good products to your customer, you're going to expand your capabilities of what you can do. So then you start adding that logic to your script. And then you start running into critical bugs here and there that you have to fix as quickly as possible, so you patch the scripts. Now, all this is happening while your scripts are aging, while your applications and environments are evolving over time. And before you know it, you're relying on 1 or 2 script stewards, if you will, to daisy chain this brittle, decade-old, spaghetti code to push out releases. So, it can feel very much to people like handling dynamite. You touch the wrong thing, you think you understand what this piece does, and it has all these unintended side effects. So what happens when that tribal knowledge leaves your company, and you're the person responsible for making a big change, like you're no longer deploying on-prem, now you're deploying to the cloud. You have to modify, half a dozen scripts in 24 different places, and not break anything in the process. And that's your responsibility now. Good luck. So this is the part of the talk where I tell you there's an easier way. And there is. So the next phase of the evolution is to model out the different components of your process and build them to form your overall process. Because in this way, you can swap out components when there's a need to do so. If you need to change your technology, change your environment, all you have to do is pull out that piece and insert another one. And also, by the very nature of this approach, these models are also reusable. So You can copy and paste what's working before and use it elsewhere in your organization for other releases that you're doing. And this reusability gives you numerous downstream benefits. So here's a sampling of some of those benefits. I sometimes refer to them as the ilities: reliability, visibility, usability, etc. And any organization that is achieving all of these is likely to be very good at what they do. Toss in a high level of innovation, and you're probably number one at what you do. Innovation is actually not listed on here because modeling out your release process doesn't automatically give you an innovative product to begin with. That's people, their ability to come up with clever solutions to non-trivial problems, to think outside the box, etc. But you can have the best team of people for doing that, but if they're all playing defense because they're firefighting because none of these things are in place, then you're not going to beat out your competitors and provide the best solution to your customers. You're always going to be catching up. So with that being said, what better way to migrate to a model-driven approach than by first capturing your existing process? Because if you can't understand the overall process, then how are you going to model it out correctly in the first place? So for this, there's not really a substitute for a whiteboard. We all do whiteboarding, weekly basis, maybe daily basis, to take the knowledge out of our head, put it somewhere that you can collaborate with other people and kind of create your best representation of what's going on in your business and in your process. So, this is great, but then, whether your whiteboard is, straightforward and easy to draw out, or whether it's this complex, nuanced thing that has all these certain exceptions and conditions and branchings, this is a great way to start to make that transition. Transition into something like a clear visualization of your value stream, your systems, your processes. This screenshot is of the pipeline model of Electric Flow, which is an application release automation tool. And it just has some sample stages for your build, your UAT, staging, and prod. And within each stage, you have tasks that correspond to that specific environment, right? It's configurable tasks that need to take place, whether it's in parallel or sequential, that need to take place in order for you to feel satisfied that it meets all the requirements for a particular environment. And of course, you have rules for how you transition between these stages, whether they be automated checks, manual approvals, or some combination of the two. This is kind of, for people in the room with a development background, this is kind of like the equivalent of an object-oriented approach. The idea being, but for process instead of code. So the idea being that you can use these objects as needed and reuse them as needed. So, and that reusability leads to other things such as predictability and quality. See, there's some more ilities. The caution here is not to get too caught up with the deeper level details at this point, because it could be overwhelming. Here's my entire process. This is supposed to capture everything. And so I've seen, in my role at Electric Cloud, I've seen customers sometimes do this. They adopt an approach like this. They're really excited because they're looking for change, and that's great. But when they try to do everything at once, all the inefficiencies of every project and every team, every application release I'm trying to do, all at once, it can kind of be too much to bite off in one bite, and they get frustrated. They say things like, we're too unique for this kind of thing. We're too screwed up. This organization is unlike any you've probably been at, and we're just too complicated, and we just have to keep doing our own thing. I hear these excuses, but really all you need is to pick a place, get one piece in place. So you create a skeleton, and then you start with one piece. You iterate on that piece until you've got a nice orchestrated, modeled out piece of this. Maybe it's just the build function of your overall pipeline, or maybe it's starting with automated tests, whatever. and then you move left or right as appropriate depending on what your pains are. In this way, you establish some quick wins. You create some excitement and momentum in your organization, because people will see this and they will kind of give you their buy-in and become interested and want to be part of this as well. So with that, it's time to think about what to model. Like I said, it's easy to get bogged down with some of the details, but at the highest level, at the broadest level, what you need to model is the what, the where, and the how. The what can be, so what is it that you're trying to deploy? What are you trying to release? This can be an application or a set of applications and all the pieces that comprise them. All the components, all the code, artifacts, packages that go along with the deployment of that application, and all dependencies that may be included in that application. The where is where are you trying to deploy? Not just like to dev or prod, but what does that mean to deploy to dev or QA or whatever. You might have physical machines, you might have virtual machines, on-prem in the cloud, containers. There's a million different places you can deploy to. You might have a hybrid environment of all of that. And then finally, now that you've got the what and the where, obviously you need to define how you want to push that a single application to an environment, multiple applications with dependencies to an environment, or to a set of environments, I should say. And also keeping track of things like compliance, right? You don't want to just push to different environments. You also want to keep those things in mind. So equally important is how to model. So going back to the whiteboard, what happens when you create a really good whiteboard and you want to keep it? Someone will come in, they'll take a picture with their phone, and they'll go to their computer, they'll upload the picture on their computer, and then they'll use some kind of visualization tool. Visio is really good like this, and they'll create these nice diagrams, nice colors, and showing, very clean and concise, or as concise as possible for your process. And then they'll maybe share it with other people in the organization. But then ultimately, it goes into a design document, requirements documentation, something like that, and it just lives there until someone comes along and either implements a piece of it or needs to change a piece of it. And when that time comes, what do? They just start writing scripts again. So you kind of like lose something during that transition. So a better approach, why not instead transfer your model into something, into a tool that allows you to actually run the model? Wouldn't it be nice to be in Visio and to just click a play button and see that first diagram just highlight itself, and you can kind of dive down and see the tasks that are running within it? So that's the kind of visibility you can get with these kind of tools. And what I mean by that is there's a class of software tools known as application release automation tools that analysts such as Gardner and Forrester, Ovum, look at when it comes to releasing software. And as a byproduct of being able to model this out and to run your visualizations, you also get the who and the when. So who ran what at what time. And that kind of brings us to compliance and governance. So a best practice here, whether you look at compliance and governance as a good thing, or a bad thing, where there's just, I need to check all these boxes, or I have all these risks, I acknowledge these risks, I know I need to take actions to mitigate these risks. This is still something that you can't ignore. You have to take into consideration. So thinking about this up front allows you to kind of include this in your process. So, for example, if you build role-based access control in a way that users are logging in as themselves instead of shared logins and things like this, you can see who did what when. In addition to, so the things that auditors care about, in the end, they bog down to two things. One is intent. I want to see the standards that you have agreed to follow, that you've put together to meet these regulations, and I want to see proof or evidence that you're actually following it. Actually having the model shows your intent. You saw that pipeline. You can tell, I want to go from this to this to this, and I have these gates in between. And then running this, and if you have things like run history and change tracking, and you're recording who logged what when, a lot of these tools, they have this built in. You can fill in all the blanks for an auditor very easily. You can say things like, developer John Smith deployed version 2.1 of the online application to QA with the test manager's approval last Wednesday at 10 o'clock. I mean, that's a pretty powerful statement. And to be able to say that to an auditor and show them that in one place instead of having to dig around and jump through all these hoops and tell them, have them only see certain things and not see other things. It's a very powerful thing, but not just for auditing, but for yourself as well. When you're authoring your process, in your ARA platform, when you're debugging, what might have gone wrong when you've run something, you're able to see that visibility allows you to determine what's going on faster and move at a quicker pace. So I touched upon this before, the topic of reusability, but it deserves a little more spotlight. An object that is available for reuse is not necessarily the same thing as a reusable object. What do I mean by that? Good ARA platforms make it easy for you to reference or copy an existing model elsewhere in the software for reuse. But if that model was created with some details that were hard coded, or it makes numerous assumptions as to what type of input, what type of environment it's being run in, then reusing that is not really practical. You find that it's too narrowly defined for what you're trying to reuse it for. Now, if on the other hand, your existing model makes use of, say, runtime parameters and has a bunch of context-specific metadata that you can just easily copy and paste into a different context and it would still run as you expect it, then it could be a lot more straightforward and time-saving exercise for you. And beyond that, a lot of these platforms, some of these platforms offer additional tools to create templates, master components, self-service catalog items, so that you can really kind of scale on demand as needed. So you onboard a single application, for example, and you say, I know I have many more applications that follow this kind of template. Now I can click a button, enter a couple of configurations, and now I've just spun up a completely new application. Whether it's something that simple or whether you have an item for creating a multi-stage CD pipeline that performs code coverage, measures performance, has all these, it defines approvals and things like that. Thinking about that reusability up front as you create these models it really empowers you in a big way as you go forward and as you scale. So using this type of platform does not mean that you have to give up what's currently working well for you. Some folks I've talked to in the past have expressed hesitation. They say, like, there are certain pieces I really like that I feel are perfectly automated, and I don't want to have to give that up in order to follow such an approach. And the good ARA platforms understand that and allow you to bring in those pieces that do work well for you. There are a plethora of tools out there that perform certain niches of functionality extremely well, and you shouldn't have to give that up in order to create a process and still use these tools. So whether you're doing some kind of checkout from Git and performing some build, etc., and then doing other things that are native to the software platform you're in, you could have all of that in one place. And that's kind of a side effect that you get when you bring all these in. There was a slide yesterday, I think, in the Disney talk where they were showing all the different technologies that the different teams were using, and I think there were like 50 logos on that screen. You couldn't even see because they integrate with so many tools, right? And imagine if you needed to really verify that something succeeded. Maybe the software is telling you it succeeded, but you're not sure because it's the first time you tried it out. You have to go into all these different tools and really verify, right, or that really built, that was really pulled, the right version and things like that. And all of that is waste, right? So bringing all that in to one central platform, it really kind of eliminates that waste and makes your process more lean in the process. So so that's something, so that visibility, that centralized location allows you to see what's going on for an individual run as well as an aggregate. So if this tool is collecting all this information from all these locations, and it has the data to provide you with higher level aggregate metrics that you can provide in built-in dashboards that your stakeholders really care about. So, you know, that's great. We get an idea of the importance of a model-driven approach to application release. And, you know, we have some ideas of some of the benefits that can be achieved and things like that. Not only to accelerate your releases, but to maximize those benefits. But where do I start? I know I start with a whiteboard. I know I create this nice pipeline and everything. But then from there, where do I start? When I hear that question, I tend to pull on the thread of, why are you doing this in the first place? If the answer is, everybody's talking about it and it seems like the right thing to do, versus I have this use case or set of use cases and they're tied to this goal or set of goals, and I don't know how I can realistically do this in the time constraints or other kind of constraints that you may have, my existing structure in the time I have. If it's the former rather than the latter, you might not get very far down this approach. If, on the other hand, you know, there's some real business initiative, like we need to reduce errors, we need to have a quicker time to market, you know, reduce costs, be more efficient, things like that, then this could be a very good approach to follow. And I would specifically recommend going at the place where your pain points are the greatest, where your bottlenecks are the greatest. Jez Humboldt said, if something hurts, do it more frequently and bring the pain forward. So if you can do that, and if you can solve your process's biggest issue, or at least one of the biggest issues, and then say, hey, this isn't a problem anymore, and show that to your organization, to your coworkers, then you can start really kind of gaining some traction, because the technology is easy in the end. Design and methodology is a little bit harder, but the hardest thing anyone will tell you is the culture, is getting people to jump on board with this. They learn one way and they want to keep going that way. People are stubborn, they're resistant to change. And the best way to diffuse that change is to demonstrate that value where it hurts the most and expand and turn them into champions such as yourself. So, in summary, if you do this right, if you incorporate these best practices, if you think about these kinds of things up front as you're switching over to this, you will get boring outcomes. Your decreased time to market will become the norm. Your all hands on deck meetings at any hour of the day or night will become a thing of the past. Onboarding new applications and switching out technologies will become more trivial, and continued growth in your business will become expected because your people are spending less time struggling to get a product out of the door and more time focusing on their core competencies for their company and innovating. So that's all I have. Any questions?